I've been developing an app for the last couple of years. It's got some traction, but I'm more interested in maybe talking about some of the lessons that I've learned in developing this app and why I built it and the kind of the use case. And then hopefully there's something there that you will learn and can take from developing this app when you develop your own app for whatever Apple device or system you want to develop for. So first, I'm going to talk about the app is primarily for building graphics for Xcode. So we'll talk about how to build graphics for Xcode now and how people typically do it. We'll then talk about how to script that and automate it. And then I'll talk about how I built the first version of the app and kind of get an understanding of how asset catalogs work in Xcode. And then get a little bit into the file formats that exist for this. And then we'll get into how to do Objective-C and Swift interop. And then continuous integration, building a command line interface, and then kind of what's my feature wish list for the next version. So how do you build graphics now for Xcode? So the one main way I think a lot of people do it is using templates. So here's an example, for instance, with Sketch. Sketch is probably one of the leading graphics applications out there. And the way that works is it has some templates already built in for building apps, so you just have to export your graphic to one slot, and then it will export all those sizes for you. This is similar to, for instance, Photoshop does kind of the same thing here. And one thing you have to watch out when you use the Photoshop template, which that is provided by Apple, you want to make sure you're generating your image assets. And then every time you change that one main icon, it'll export all the different sizes for an app icon, for instance. This obviously is for the biggest challenge, which is app icons. But this doesn't necessarily do the 1x, 2x, and 3x sizes that you'll need. So you kind of have to do that yourself when you export a size. And that can be a little bit of a cumbersome chore to do. And if anybody knows what it's like to open an app like Photoshop, you end up having to read a list of every library that it loads when it shows you the copyright screen in the beginning, and that can be a pain in the butt. So I decided that what I want to do is script those exports so I didn't have to, and make that actually part of the build process, because I can add a run script in Xcode to do that. So what I wanted to do is actually take something like a SVG file, which can be scaled without losing data, and take that and then use something like Inkscape to export those sizes, and then, for instance, for JPEG files, use something like ImageMagick to then resize those images. So I wrote a script. Here's a couple lines of code for exporting app icons using SVG. And so you can see here I have like a for loop and bash that then goes through and exports each size with a suffix saying what size. And then you also find that with app icons, there's duplicates of sizes, so you actually need 2 copies of the file. So then I go in and I copy the files that need duplicates. You have support for PDF files. I don't know if you knew this in image sets. So I use Inkscape again to export the PDF. And then for things like JPEG files, for instance, I want to export those to PNGs of different sizes. So like if I have a photo I want to use in an app, I can do that here. And this works, but it's like a Jenga tower. If you have to change one little thing, good luck. So then I thought to myself, let's automate this. Let's put it into an actual Mac app that I can then use. So that's when I decided I was going to build the first version of this app. And what that will do is, rather than having to manually write the sizes down, I can go in and look at the JSON file, so your contents JSON file, we'll get into that, and know what sizes I need to export, what file type I want to export as. I can just run the command to run Inkscape and ImageMagick if I need to, and then use like a dispatch group to track each task, and then export output to the user that all exports are completed, and kind of automate what the script does. So let's get a little bit into how asset catalogs work. So in your typical project in Xcode, you have like an assets file with XC assets, right? This is where your app icons, image assets, colors, things like that are stored. And in the case of image files, you have two types. You have app icons and you have image sets. They all contain some sort of thing. They contain some sort of structure where they have a file name. So let's say a notification icon for an iPad needs the file name it goes to. It needs what scale. So is it Retina iPad? Is it a old style 1X iPad? And then we have an idiom, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then app icons, for instance, those are humongous. You can get as many as 41 individual files. For instance, I'm building an app right now that's for macOS, watchOS, and iOS. And it ends up being 41 files needed for an app icon because of all the OSs. And that's a pain in the butt to deal with manually. And you also have a field in that case called idiom. And that says basically what device or what purpose it has. So that could be Mac, iPhone, iPad, watch, car, which is CarPlay. So don't think that's something else. iOS marketing and watch marketing, which is essentially for iTunes Connect. So what I have essentially is some sort of file, a JSON file, that will link your app icon folder or your image set folder with your SVG file, and then provide any extra metadata it needs to do that conversion. So here's a kind of example of a couple of files in their format. We have a set, a source, and then either like a geometry maybe, or a background color, or a flag to say whether to remove alpha. So let's take a quick look. So we have a set which points to the folder that is your image set or your app icon folder. And then you have a source, which could either be a PNG file or an SVG file. That's your source image that you're going to be using for the app icon or the image set. One thing you'll note is that app icons cannot have backgrounds in them. So I have two additional flags that you can set to set a background color and also to remove the alpha. And the background color is just either an 8 or 6-digit hex code, depending on if you want a transparency, which of course normally you wouldn't want. And that will then add a background color to your SVG file so that it's actually usable as an app icon. One of the reasons that Apple doesn't use SVG files in their image sets and their app icons is because SVG files don't have an inherent size. So when you export from SVG to like an image set, you need to say what the 1x size is. And so I have a property here called geometry, which tells it either the width or the height. And so if you want to do width, you just put the number in. If you do height, you do x and then the number. And what that does is it'll then scale the image properly for that height for the 1x image. So in this case, what will be exported for the 1x will be a 128 pixel width image by whatever aspect, keeping the aspect ratio to whatever height it's going to be. There were some issues with the first version I felt. I didn't like how much friction there was in installing and using the app at first. I wanted to remove the need for using Brew to install the app. I wanted to remove the need for dependencies and installation. Particularly, Inkscape uses exports to do all the heavy lifting. And even with Inkscape, I don't use the GUI, so why am I installing this graphics program when all I need to do is some back-end stuff, essentially? So I decided what I was going to do is use some C++ libraries in Swift.